Hi, I am Jennifer Purcell, and welcome to my podcast, Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge, where we will discuss, discover, and learn more about the challenges and triumphs of those with NLD and other learning challenges. I do have a website for this podcast, and it is called livingwithnld.com. I also have a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter account for the podcast. They are all under the same name, which is Living with NLD. I also have a YouTube channel for the podcast, which can be found by Googling the title of the podcast, which is Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge. I would like to tell you about a nonprofit that I use for my research for this podcast. It is called the NVLD Project, and I use their blog for my research. They are a nonprofit that is based in New York and is trying to get NVLD back on the DSM, and they provide many resources for people with NVLD on their website. I'll provide you with the website for them in the podcast description. All proceeds from the ads on this podcast will be donated towards the NVLD project. Please feel free to explore the other topics on the podcast, and hopefully you will learn something new from them. I hope you enjoy today's episodes. I also want to mention to you that I just launched my podcast swag on Wednesday of this week and have a page for it on my website, and I will also send you the link to it in the podcast description, and I will also send it to you in the newsletter that I usually send out on Fridays. I am now selling t-shirts, water bottles, and a backpack, and they all have the podcast logo and title on it and the tagline. So I am looking forward to watching the sales and seeing who buys them, and spreading the word more about my podcast. And today I am very excited to announce that BetterHelp is now sponsoring this podcast. I have had 7 years of therapy, so I know it can help change your life if you not only let it, but work on the personal goals that you set with your therapist. Without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy works. But what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships at work, not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles and start feeling better, because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. Join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are the greatest asset. And special offering to listeners of Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/ I'll put in the link in the podcast description for you. That's BetterHelp, HELEP. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast. Also, another announcement that I have to make is I recently created another podcast called Sleepy Butterfly for people who have challenges with sleeping at night or meditating, and it's geared towards people who are auditorily sensitive or and or have chronic migraines, and being able to have nice, relaxing nature sounds for them to fall asleep to or to meditate to and be able to be refreshed the next day or when they come out of their meditation. So some of the sounds are like chimes or nature sounds like water or rainforest. And again, it's called Sleepy Butterfly. It is on Spotify and also Apple Podcast and Google Podcast. And it's on everywhere else where you can get podcasts as well. So I hope you are able to get some benefits out of that one also. The next Facebook chat will be in August, and it will be on the 20th at 10 a.m. Pacific time zone to 11:30 a.m. Pacific time zone. And that it is a safe space for you to talk about anything you would wish to and your challenges with NVLD. Hope to see you there. Today's episode is an interview with Olivia and me, and she is one of the NVLD project social ambassadors. And she is from the East Coast, and I hope that you enjoy her interview. All right, so I'm here today with Olivia. She's one of the NVLD project social ambassadors, and I'm going to interview her about her life with NVLD and ask her some questions. So, Olivia, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Olivia. I'm 30 years old from Illinois. So
great. Let's see. Do you, I think you're a songwriter also, right?
yes, I'm a singer-songwriter. Have been for a few years. Though I loved music since I was a kid, so it's kind of awesome because I've been doing what I've loved since I was a kid. So I have a album out already. I'm working on some new music that hopefully y'all will hear soon.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Do you play any instruments other than singing?
Oh yeah, I do. I play guitar. I've been playing for 10 years, maybe. Although I would say I'm no expert. I pretty much picked it up so I could write songs with like guitar because like it was a way to get music from my head out, like, like hearing the music in my head out the side of my head.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And so I'm good. I won't say I'm an expert though. That and I've just started trying to learn piano as well.
Cool. I've kind of thought of learning piano because sometimes people say I have piano fingers. So maybe
you look like you do actually.
For those of you who don't know, I am from San Diego, California, and I also have NVLD, and like I've mentioned before in some of the podcast interviews, I also have chronic migraine. So for me, those are I consider those two disabilities and two different ones.
Oh, me too. Yeah, I have so you have chronic migraines. I have what's known as abdominal migraines. It's like very rare. It's like in the stomach, and it affects more when you're like a kid. You're supposed to grow out of it when you're like an adult, and I did. And so that's different as well from that. And then I was also low muscle tone, or I was diagnosed with low muscle tone at 9 months old, which surprisingly was like my first symptom of NVLD. But the NVLD project, and I see where they're coming from with this. They say there's not enough research to kind of put those two together, make that a symptom, which is true because low muscle tone can also be considered like a symptom of many other things too. But yeah, for me, it was NVLD.
Yeah, I can relate to that with migraines because I know other NVLDers who have migraines too. And I don't think there's enough people out there with NVLD and migraines for them to do research and realize, for me at least, it coincides because they both started, well, when I got diagnosed with NVLD, that's when the migraine started in college.
So I was like, there's some connection.
Right. For me, and that's so funny you say that, because for me it was in high school. So let me backtrack. So a couple of
Mhm.
years ago, I called my pediatrician because I was trying to write more of a story for my experience with NVLD. And so I was asking him questions about weak motor skills and like muscle tone and everything like that. And then I thought I'd bring up the whole fact that when I was a kid, what I had, the abdominal migraines, was known as for me way back then, which was like, I was born in 1990, where all my parents and I were told from doctors of hospitals, because what abdominal migraines is like, it triggers in your stomach, and then you are like fine 1 minute, next you're going to the bathroom to puke, and you puke so much
Oh.
you have to go to get and that was happening to me. I had to go to get an IV at the hospital. I didn't always stay overnight at the hospital, but it was just and it didn't happen like constantly. It was just, oh, I might have froze. Can you still see me? It says
Yeah, I
internet.
can still see you.
Okay.
That's okay.
Or hear me, yeah.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, long story short of all that, so I always was like, I wonder if there's a name for it now. And I asked him about my pediatrician. My pediatrician was like, oh no, yeah, those are called abdominal migraines. And I was just like, whoa, it was like kind of finding out NVLD when I was younger. And I know we'll get into that, but I was just like, oh my God, it makes so much sense. So when I looked that up, they said migraines, they say kids grow out of it, like abdominal migraines, but they may have migraines later on. And I went, no wonder in high school I went to get an MRI twice, because I kept complaining to my parents that my head, I don't understand this. All it's like worse than headaches. And the MRI found nothing. They said it could be migraines or that, and I so I get it now very rarely like that, because I think that because it started with abdominal migraines, I again don't know. This is also something that's very not researched enough, so we'll
Right.
see.
Theoretical.
Yeah. So it was just so it's to hear you say that and other NVLD people say that, it makes so much sense, because I'm like, yep, I'll get those too. Yeah.
Yeah, it does make sense for me too, because when I went to um, get my MRI as well for my migraines, because I suffered through all of college just thinking they were headaches.
Yeah.
Um, and then they didn't stop when I graduated, and I was like, okay, I have to do something about it. And nothing came up on my MRI either that like no tumor or anything like that that they thought would cause it. And um at the time I was still learning more about MLD because I was diagnosed when I was 19, and trying to figure out, okay, is there a connection to that or not? But
Yeah.
do you know when you were diagnosed?
So my story is kind of unique in the sense that I was diagnosed when I was 9 years old, but
Mhm.
I didn't find out till I was 14 years old.
Mm.
So my parents decided to wait to tell me, and I think, and I know how some people, like I've told that people are like, wait, they waited to tell you, but I'm like, you don't understand. It was like early 2000s. There wasn't much information about NVLD, and they were right. So what happened was, when I found out about it, I was running. So it was a few weeks before, it was beginning of August before high school.
Mhm.
And I was training for volleyball, and I really wanted to make the volleyball team. So my sister suggested I run because
Nope, you froze a little bit.
this, I'm like, with weak motor skills and also abdominal migraines, like those two together, like it just I couldn't run. Like I could run, but without my heart beating so fast and me feeling
Mm.
nauseous. But my sister's like, no, you just gotta train yourself endurance. So for like a couple weeks, that's what I was doing, including biking around my neighborhood or swimming around my neighborhood. And then one day, and this is the craziest thing, I was listening. And that's a 4-minute song. So when that song ended, I ended And the next song on my playlist ended up being like a slow. God, I just ran this long without stopping. And pretty much all of a sudden I was like, this woman's voice came into my head that said, when you listen to something upbeat, it helps you ignore what's underneath. And I was like, who told me that? And I realized I saw this woman couldn't for other things as well. I saw her for like I was riding a pen pal with her. I did an obstacle course with her. I was solving math problems with her. So I couldn't understand who she was. And then it was like all these other things that I questioned in my childhood came into my head. And I was like, well, the last thing being these two boys in 8th grade science, just like 3 months prior, who were talking about ADHD and who were talking about Adderall. And I turned around in my seat and I was like, oh, I'm on Vyvanse. And they said, what do you have? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I just take it to focus. Yeah. Yeah. So they all looked at me. These two boys looked at me and they're like, well, you might have ADHD like us. And life got in the way, distractions got in the way, didn't really like focus on that until like all of a sudden this moment, all these things are up on my head. It's like, all right, well, my parents will know what do I have because I probably have something, if it's not dehydration problems, then what do I have? Because I knew from those flashbacks that the hydration problems or abdominal migraines were different. So went back, waited for my parents, woke up. Right when my parents came in the kitchen, I just went, hey, I have to ask you guys something. What do I have? And the looks on their faces were just like, what do you mean? So I like related everything I just related to you of like the flashbacks of that. And my mom just went nonverbal learning disability. And so they told me for like good hour my symptoms. They told me like all the like pretty much like everything that led up to my diagnosis. And then I asked them, I did say, why didn't you tell me when I was 9? And they said, well, and I love them for this because they said, well, we were told that people with NVLD love to talk, which is very true. We love to talk. And you didn't want to go off telling your friends about NVLD and them to look it up because also internet, there was no social really media back then. It was I think fairly new. I mean, maybe MySpace, but still fairly like new. So like there wasn't much research or anything, but you look it up and NVLD back then was way different than what it is now. The research, there's much more research done, all that. So my parents didn't want my friends to all of a sudden look it up and then think I'm something I'm not, because they were also told I didn't have all the symptoms or had a mild case. So they just didn't want kids to be mean and bullied. I was already bullied in middle school. And so I actually very much appreciate that in them for like waiting to tell me when the time was right. Because I did like, were you ever going to tell me? And they were like, yeah, we were planning on it. Trust me, we were planning on it. You just beat us to the punch, which is true. We did. Yeah.
That makes sense. I mean, looking back at it for me, when I found out I had NLD, everything just kind of clicked and made sense to me of what I was going through in high school and earlier, because it was like, oh, that's why I have challenges with math and other things. I actually also did running for a long time, and because I guess I don't know why, maybe because I didn't have abdominal migraines, but that was easier for me. And I also ski, and I don't know how I can do both of those things with fine motor challenges of NLD, but I guess because mine is also less severe than it can be for some people, it's easier.
Yeah, I noticed that too. I mean, it's that you froze also in the beginning, so I'm thinking you're talking about motor skills. Am I right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry if I keep freezing too. I hope you got all of that.
Oh, it's okay. I'm sure people will understand it.
Yeah.
Zoom can freeze.
Yeah. But you were so it's also too, I think also with it being more severe, I also had like what are they called, occupational therapists and all that to help out when I was um like a baby. I had to go to physical therapy for that, like to
Mm.
help with the so yeah, I think it's all if you, not saying if you get the help in the beginning, maybe it's, I don't know, because I don't want to say yes or no. It's all, like we said, it's all hypothetical still, like with NVLD, which is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, so since you were talking about research earlier, I was going to ask you a little bit about the NVLD project and why you decided to become an ambassador.
Decided to become ambassador because, well, so during the pandemic, the beginning of 2020, the lockdown,
Mhm.
I decided to take that time, since singing songwriting was kind of also like going to recording studios was on a pause. Everything pretty much was on a pause.
Yeah.
So I decided to take that time and work on this book I've been trying to write since I was 22 years old. So 8 years later, and I was like, okay, I've been on and off for those years trying to get back to it. So I started writing it. And then there was just certain things where like I would read these symptoms, but like, all right, well, I would try to connect the symptoms or certain things that I was going through. And I was looking up some of the symptoms like online just to see like with MVLD, get more detail about it so I could kind of put it in my book. And I saw the MVLD project and I saw like what they were doing. And to be honest, writing a book is, I mean, for
It's not
anybody,
easy.
it's not easy. I mean, oh gosh, there was someone who's, yeah, I forgot what author said it, but some authors was like,
Was your book about NLD?
yeah, my book was about growing up with MVLD.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, my book was, and also other things too. Like it was like it's kind of a coming of age of not just dealing with MVLD, but also like dealing with first crushes, dealing with high
Mm.
school and middle school and all those things. While also accepting that I have MVLD as well. And so I saw this project and I went, oh, they have blocks. Maybe that would be easier to tell my story that way instead of keep writing over the same thing and like second guessing myself, overthinking. And so I ended up I ended up like I'm emailing them. They emailed me back. And so we had like a Zoom meeting like this. And they were
Mhm.
like, well, yeah, if you want to write for us. And so that's how I got into writing for that MVLD project. Yeah.
Cool. I can relate to the book thing too, because I also tried to write a book about NVLD. And um, actually, that's how I got the name for the podcast, Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge, because that was the title for my book,
Mm-hmm.
which, and I kept realizing, like you, it was hard for me. And I was like, I don't think I'm ever going to finish this. And if I am, it's going to take me a long time. And my mom's written a book, so I watched her, so I know that's what that's like, but she's neurotypical, so that's easier for her.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when I uh when I started the podcast during the pandemic as well, I started it because I was listening to another podcast and I was like, wait a second, I can make a podcast instead of a book, like you were thinking with the blogs. And that was easier for me because I'm really auditory and verbal, which most people are with NVLD.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that's easier for me than writing. And I found out I can do writing pretty well if it's creative writing. And I don't mind writing like the podcast script out to help reference things for me
Yeah.
because it's just, I can go off script. It's just,
Right, right. Yeah, no, it's what you're doing with the ending. It's like what I learned in college, that it was like the 101 thing of learning, of like asking the questions for writing them out so you know what to say, because we can go off script and we probably have, but it's, yeah, it's the great thing to do. And I honestly, when I heard you at this podcast, I was like, oh, somebody has like, awesome. It's great to like listen to other people. Like I think I went 28 years without knowing somebody with MVLD, which is
oh,
to me so crazy. Like, but yeah, my hope for like telling my story, because blogs are great too, but the thing I'm trying to write is, and I worked with the NVLD project with this, is, or talked to them about this, is writing the 5 stages to accepting NVLD, because I went through all that. I went through denial, went through bargaining. I mean, I could have a whole other we could have a whole other episode about this, because that was all through high school, and I did all the like to the accepting stage. And so I'm trying to write that, but writing that, it's like, okay, well, this happened here, but I also want to add this, but is it really important to add it? Or, so it's like a thing. So the way I see it too is sometimes it's in my songs, like my struggles with NVLD, but also I've struggled with things with unrelated to NVLD, or not just struggle, but like my songs aren't all about NVLD. I should but that's one way I'm doing it. And then my hope for the future is maybe someday, because I love film and TV, to like create a show or movie about my life growing up with it. Because I see that with and I would love to ask you this. I see that so much with dyslexia, ADHD, and autism. I think those are the top 3. And I've never seen, when any character, in my opinion, when any character on a TV show has a learning disability, it's 90% of the time, and to me it feels like 99% of the time, dyslexia. And I'm like, here we go, somebody with dyslexia. And don't get me wrong, dyslexia is very important to bring out there and bring out to the focal point, and like have people watch it and understand it. But there's so many other learning disabilities, or even developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities as well, to bring out to the forefront. So it's like, all right, come on, TV writers and movie writers, like bring out a character that doesn't have dyslexia or something else. Because it's not dyslexia, it's the math one that I've seen now that
Dyscalculia.
Yeah, thank you. It's it's hard to pronounce that for me, but it's like,
me too.
Yeah. It's just, so that's what my hope is, to tell that. And the NVLD project is kind of just the start of that. Also, apologies if I'm talking really fast, because when I get passionate, I tend to talk really fast. That's what my brain somebody tells me. So
That's okay. I tend to do that too. I actually had to slow down my talking speed for the podcast because my mom realized I was talking too fast on it in the beginning. And I didn't realize it because I just felt like it was normal. And she was like, you might want to slow down because it's a little hard sometimes to understand you as a listener. And I appreciated her constructive feedback, because I was like, oh yeah, you're right. Other people with NVLD might be listening to it because of them having slower processing speed. I should slow down. And I did. And I can relate with the what you were saying about the film and the project as well, because whenever I see a commercial for autism, I'm like, okay, yes, autism is important, because I know it's important because I've worked with people who have autism. But it's like, I want one about NLD. I want it to be out there more, and for people to know more about it. And I even mentioned that to the project before I was an ambassador, and they weren't looking into that. I don't think they are yet, but
hopefully, like, I'm not saying I know people in TV or anything like that, but that's like my hope and my goal is to like, not that this is the main goal. My goal with my music is to I loved music when I was a kid, and how I related to music, and what music, how I like, they're like, that's what I want to do with my music, and help, if it helps one person, or if it makes one person happy or anything like that, then I'm like, to me, that's all that matters. But if somehow I go along this field and meet more people along the way, that's not just in music but entertainment industry, that's my hope too, is to like, if that would be probably the first thing I would do for like film or TV, is to try to tell that story and other people's stories too. Because when you're saying about that commercial with autism, it's like, yeah, okay, it's just time, because the thing is, we're just not represented, and there's other like people with other things that aren't represented. And like, I have a niece with autism. It is so important to like bring that out there, and ADHD and dyslexia too, but it's like, all right, well, like, because the thing is, I think that a bunch of people with NVLT can relate is that we don't have that. We don't have something to relate to, or we don't have our families, our friends, or other coworkers can't see on screen and understand what we see with our eyes, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you see it on screen, like you see a dyslexia person, or a dyslexic person, I should say, like struggle and everything like that, then you understand when someone says, I'm dyslexic, what they're struggling with. I had that experience with a coworker of mine who asked me years ago when I was a transportation office assistant. He had this address and he asked me to read it to him because he's like, I'm a little dyslexic, I can't read it. So I read it to him, and without asking him about dyslexia, without questioning him, without being like, really, you can't read that, because
Mhm.
I knew from watching TV, from learning about dyslexia. Oh, okay, yeah, he really struggles with it. It's just easier for me just to say, hey, all right, no problem, I'll read it to you and read it to you. I think that's a huge thing about MVLD, to see on the screen. People are finally, because they think, like, when we're younger, and I think you can probably agree, hopefully you will agree with me on this. When we're younger, we look like any other kid. We act
Right.
like any other kid, but we sometimes act out without knowing we act out,
Mhm.
or without our family. I've had that with my sister. I kept repeating a question to my mom once, and when I was little, and my sister is like, all right, Olivia, we get it. And I was repeating because I was just like, but I still don't understand why I have to, why this is happening and not this. And my mom was explaining in so many different ways. And my mom probably told her, she just wants to understand and gets it. And and that was literally a year before I got diagnosed.
Mm.
But it's the kind of thing, like, she knew, my mom knew stuff was up, because like with being I was got with my speech therapist that I had, an occupational therapist, that. But it's the thing where, like, my sister was like, oh, okay, and then she started getting it. But I think if people saw it represented on screen more, people would start understanding what we go through, instead of, because I don't know about you, but every time I'm like, I have nonverbal learning disability, majority of time people are like, you can
Huh?
talk. Yeah. You, or huh? Or you can talk. And I'm like, yeah, it's the nonverbal cues. Oh, wait, so it's like dyslexia? No. Yeah, that's what I get all the time. I love you shaking your head right now. 'Cause I get all the
Like, yeah, I can totally relate to that because it's like, um, usually sometimes I say the name right away, but sometimes I don't because of, like you said, them not understanding what it is. And to be honest, it's because there's not enough research and not one definition out there
Mhm.
that can be agreed upon by any professional people in the field. It's like, that's why it's not on the DSM anymore.
My parents told me, when my mom said nonverbal learning disability, I said, what is it? Like, what's the definition? That's what I said. And my parents looked at each other, and my dad was like, well, there's not really a definition. It's easier if we just explain your symptoms. And that's how they told me. And that's, yeah, you're right. A bunch of definite, like, people in the field change. And I think they're trying to even change the name, which if they do, I'm kind of on board for it. Because to be honest, I think one of the things I've read or heard was visual spatial like disorder or something like
Yeah.
that, instead of, which I'm all for, because my visual spatial awareness is way more off than my nonverbal cues as an adult. So that goes to, so that's me with NVLD. That may not be somebody else with NVLD, but yeah, my visual spatial awareness, like when I drive, I'm good. When I park, I'm good now with cameras. I used to be like, yeah. So
I
I
can
totally get
relate.
what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a little skeptic about changing the name because, yes, people with NLD do have visual challenges, and I have those too.
Mhm.
It's often hard for me to park, and I don't have a car with cameras. So I have had to practice a lot with that because my car is kind of old. Um, but I don't want them to think when they see the visual that that's the only symptom that somebody with NLD has, you
That's
know?
yeah. That's
Um,
true, but that's also with the nonverbal thing,
right.
which is
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Like
it's like, can you rename it with something like social visual or something like that?
yeah, something like that. Or
Oh,
like one word like dyslexia or like I mean ADHD when you say that it's much shorter than attention deficit.
deficit
Yeah,
disorder.
yeah.
Yeah, it's okay.
But yeah. But it's yeah, I totally agree with you. It's gonna be interesting to see what yeah, it will be or turn out to
Yeah,
be.
and it's also interesting because it's like, if they change the name and they do list other symptoms, I'm okay with that because then people can see that, like I said, they do have other things than just nonverbal or visual symptoms. And, um, it is a little bit like autism because there's a spectrum of the how you can experience the symptoms, and I'm sure you've heard of that before. Um,
Sorry,
and
repeat that last line. Sorry, you said
Well, it's a little bit like a spectrum with autism, where with autism, it's high
right.
functioning or low
Oh,
functioning. That
absolutely.
with
Right.
NLP
I
too.
caught that, but yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, because with the symptoms of NLP, people can experience them so severely.
Mhm.
Like some people with NLP can't even drive.
Mhm. Oh yeah.
They've
Yeah.
tried, but they just can't.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's
And today I am very excited to announce that BetterHelp is now sponsoring this podcast. I have had 7 years of therapy, so I know it can help change your life if you not only let it, but work on the personal goals that you set with your therapist. Without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy works. But what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships at work, not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles and start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist. So you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's more affordable than in person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. Join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are the greatest asset. And special offering to listeners of Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/. I'll put in the link in the podcast description for you. That's BetterHelp, HELEP. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast.
Also, another announcement that I have to make is I recently created another podcast called Sleepy Butterfly for people who have challenges with sleeping at night or meditating, and it's geared towards people who are auditorily sensitive or have chronic migraines, and being able to have nice relaxing nature sounds for them to fall asleep to or to meditate to and be able to be refreshed the next day or when they come out of their meditation. So some of the sounds are like chimes or nature sounds like water or rainforest. And again, it's called Sleepy Butterfly. It is on Spotify and also Apple Podcast and Google Podcast. And it's on everywhere else where you can get podcasts as well. So I hope you are able to get some benefits out of that one also.
As I wrap up, there are some things I would like to share with you. I do have a website for this podcast. It is called livingwithnld.com. I also have a Facebook and Instagram page for this podcast. It is called Living with NLD. I will include the links for those in the description. In conclusion, I would like to hear from my audience. If you know individuals with NLD that I could interview for this podcast, please email me at livingwithnld@gmail.com. What are you interested in learning about NLD? I know I'm not an expert, but I do know I have the living experience of having it. I would like you to practice journaling about your gifts and differences. Also see if there is a way that you can make that difference become easier for you to do than it originally was. Thank you for listening today, and please go to my YouTube channel and subscribe to it. Thank you. Bye.